Hello, my name is Weiss. I'm an Aliyah advisor at Nefesh, and I'm excited to be able to present to you today what we call first steps to Aliyah. This is specifically for long-term planning. We're talking about people who are looking at making Aliyah 2 to 5 years or more down the line. If you're thinking about making Aliyah sooner than that, that's fantastic. There are webinars that we have specifically for those who are making Aliyah more in the short term. So I would encourage you to tune into one of those. But as far as making Aliyah in the long term, if that's where you're holding right now, you're in the right place, and that's what we're going to discuss. Maybe you find yourself in a situation that you're an individual who's looking to make Aliyah. Maybe you're a married couple looking to make Aliyah. Maybe you have a number of children and you're thinking about Aliyah down the road. Maybe you're already retired or an empty nester and you're thinking about moving to Israel when you retire. Whatever the case might be, we will touch upon aspects of planning for Aliyah, and as we discussed, in the next 2 to 5 years. By way of introduction, just to give a little bit about myself, my wife and I made Aliyah just over 10 years ago. We made Aliyah with 5 children. And I've been working at Nefesh, thank God, for over 9 years now, assisting Olim with making Aliyah. Nefesh has over 20 years of experience bringing Olim to Israel, and we've brought over 75,000 Olim. So the information that you're going to be seeing in this short presentation comes from experience of over 20 years and over 75,000 Olim. I want to encourage you as we go through this information. You're welcome, of course, to be able to watch this more than once if need be. And you're welcome to reach out to Nefesh with any questions and any assistance that you may need. That being said, let's get started. So when we talk about Aliyah, I like to talk about 2 parts of Aliyah. And people say, well, what's really the more important part of it? Well, really, the 2 parts are kind of 2 sides of the same coin. They're both just as important. They both need our attention. One is the planning aspect of Aliyah, and the other is the procedural side of Aliyah. What are we talking about, really? When we talk about planning, we're talking about things like community, where you'll be living, finances, employment, what you'll be doing to support yourselves, your education, if that's relevant, healthcare, and a number of other topics we'll be covering today. So there's the planning aspect of Aliyah, and then there's the procedural side. That's more the nitty-gritty. Things like the actual Aliyah process itself, the rights and benefits. Those are the things that are given to you by the state of Israel when you make Aliyah. Eligibility for Aliyah, as well as the documentation. Those are the legal documentation that has to be presented, because when you make Aliyah, you are gaining citizenship in a foreign country. So all of these things we're going to be addressing. And of course, as you get closer to your Aliyah date, many of these things will become much more relevant and much more practical, and there will be more detail that will be required. For now, we're going to be looking at each of them, like we said, from a long-term stance. What can be done already to prepare and to plan for Aliyah? Let's start with the planning aspect. So when we talk about Aliyah planning, so we're going to touch upon these 5 or 6 items. Community, where you'll be living, employment, which is always key as far as supporting yourself, education and army, healthcare, as well as finances. Now people say, well, finances and employment, aren't those the same thing? Well, we're going to see. For some people who are already retired, or some people who are not yet working, we'll be able to address each of these separately. So let's jump right into it. People say, well, what should I be focused on? I'm now 2 to 5 years down the road, and I want to think about moving to Israel. What's something that I should focus on, that I should think about? Well, the first thing you can think about, of course, is where would you like to live in Israel? What community would you like to live? Have you been to Israel on a visit? Incidentally, if you haven't been to Israel yet, you should plan on taking a visit to Israel. You'll be able to take a look at different communities. You'll be able to get a feel, a sense of the country. And why is this important, by the way, that you visit Israel prior to making Aliyah? Even though Israel is a westernized country, and even though it is a first world country, it is a different country, and there's a different cadence at which the country operates, and you get a feel for that. It's neither good nor bad, it's just different. And you want to develop that appreciation prior to making Aliyah. And this is going to be relevant with regards to where you're going to live, as well as the other things we're going to touch on. So again, as far as community is concerned, there's a huge diversity of communities that are available in Israel. And you can literally research based on what it is that you're looking for. What types of things are you looking for in each of these points that we're going to discuss? Maybe you're in a situation where you already have a home in Israel. Maybe you already own property in Israel. That's fantastic. For those people who are still looking and deciding whether they'll be purchasing or whether they'll be renting, that's what we're going to be talking about now. Number one, of course, you want to look at affordability. Now, different communities, just like in North America, if you are in the big city, generally the cost of living is going to be higher. Property is going to cost more. If you're more in the suburbs, you're going to find things to be more affordable. In a similar way, you'll find such pricing in Israel as well, although not always the same. So, for example, we like to say that if you're in the center of the country, property and rentals will be higher, although not across the board. But if you find yourself in the periphery of the country, in the north or in the south, things will generally be more affordable. Like I said, it's not a general rule because you have cities in the north and the south. You have Haifa, for example, in the north. You have Beersheba, for example, in the south. Those are cities. And because they're cities, of course, you'll find that the property may be a little bit more pricey than you would, again, in the suburbs. But again, that's something that you'll be looking at in terms of affordability. Based on what it is you're going to afford, or what you're projecting you'll be able to afford, which community would be best for you. But also, if you're going to be working when you make Aliyah, you want to think about proximity to employment. Now, we're going to circle back to employment. It's a little too early to find a job right now if you're looking 2 to 5 years down the road. But if you know, for example, that you're working in high tech or you're working in sales and you want to be close to a major hub in Israel, so you may want to find a community that's closer to, say, Tel Aviv or to Jerusalem or to a major city. If you are able to work remotely, if you're working in programming computers, just as an example, then you may have much more freedom in terms of distance from workplace because you might be able to work remotely. If you are in the medical profession, of course, you would be looking at communities that would be close proximity to medical centers where you'd be able to commute for work. So again, that's another consideration that you want to keep in mind. If you are still in university or planning to be in university, or if you have children who are going to be in school when you make Aliyah, so that's also something that's very important to research with regards to community. We're going to circle back to education as well, but just as far as community is concerned, you want to be able to research different schools and services that are available in the community for your children and for the family. Another thing to consider is the percentage of English speakers and the percentage of services that are available in English in the community that you're looking. Now, some people, when they look for communities, when they make Aliyah, they say, I want to go to a community, what we call a soft landing. I want to go to a community where there are a large percentage of English speakers, and I'll be able to gradually absorb into the country. But at least in the beginning, I will have people to be able to communicate with in English. That's fantastic, and it works wonderfully. There are other people who say, no, I want to go cold turkey on English, and I'm going to move to a community where there are very few English speakers, and I'm going to have to jump right into it and use my Hebrew. And guess what? That works as well. It's a question of what's going to be best for you. And this is a question that you can speak about with your spouse, with your family, as far as what it is that you're looking for in terms of percentage of English speakers. In general, as you move towards the periphery of the country, towards the north and the south, you'll generally find fewer English speakers, although those communities still may have strong English-speaking networks and support systems. Whereas in the center of the country, cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, communities like Beit Shemesh and Ra'anana and Netanya and others, you'll find large percentages perhaps of English speakers. Another thing to consider might be the topography and the climate. Communities in Israel have varied topographies. There are communities that are very hilly. There are communities that are flat. There are communities that are close to the water. There are communities that are closer to the desert. And there are communities in the mountains. So you can find cooler locations. You can find more humid locations, more arid locations. If you are more into walking, then that might be fine. If you are not into walking as much, you might be interested in finding a community that doesn't have as many hills. These are things that you want to be able to look into, especially if you're looking at communities where you plan to live long-term, God willing. Some people tell me that they want to look for communities that have cooler temperatures. And there are communities that are more in the hills, and you'll find cooler evenings, cooler winters as well. However, keep in mind that this is the Middle East. So in general, it's going to be a hotter climate. There's going to be hot summers. If you have difficulty with the heat, you want to find a community either that's cool, that's in the hills, or make sure you have lots of air conditioning, or a community that has lots of shade. Another thing to consider is the demographics of the community. What type of people are you looking for in your community? Are you looking for a varied age demographic, a varied religious demographic? Are you looking for a community that has lots of families and young kids? Or are you looking for a community of singles, a community with retirees? Are you looking for a community that has a more homogeneous religious background, or something more heterogeneous, some with as far as religious practice is concerned? What's great about Israel is that you can decide for yourself, determine what it is that you're looking for, and then we can focus on those communities for you to be able to research. And you're really able to do this. You can sit down with your spouse, sit down with your family, and decide what are those things you're looking for in a community, and then we'll be able to target those places for you to research. Lastly, you can look into what type of a community in terms of size and amenities. Some people are really into the big city and they want to move to a place where they have a nightlife, where there's a lot of things to do, and you have that available in Israel. And you don't even have to live in the big city. For example, if you want to have amenities of Tel Aviv, but you don't want to pay for the price of the apartments in Tel Aviv, well, maybe you could live just outside Tel Aviv in the suburbs. It'll be a little more affordable, but you still have all those amenities. Some of us are into more quiet, smaller town type of feel for a small town atmosphere, and that's available as well. So depending on what it is that you're looking for, you'll be able to find it. Now people say, so wait a second, great, so I know what it is that I need to research. How do I do that research? Well, on our website, on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website, we have resources for you. We have what we call a community profiles database. We highlight about 30 or so communities, which are kind of like the top picks. It just works out for Olim who come to Israel. They're not obviously the only destinations for Olim, but they seem to be the top ones. As well, those communities have designated English-speaking Aliyah liaisons that work for the municipalities. So those communities are wonderful in terms of doing research. There's also, for communities, we have a whole list of community contacts. These are volunteers who are there, who are willing to give information about communities. If you research a community and want more information, you can reach out to someone like that, to a volunteer. Communities have Facebook pages, they have websites and listservs, and there's lots of ways to be able to research these communities. You can also contact Nefesh B'Nefesh directly and speak to one of our community specialists who'll be able to also point you in the right direction. So now that we've talked a lot about communities, let's move on to something else. How about employment? Employment is a big question and a big issue, a big area of research. And people say, oh my gosh, what am I going to do in Israel? How am I going to support myself? So there are a few things to be aware of in terms of planning for this. Number one, we understand we're projecting 2 to 5 years down the road at a minimum. So we're not talking about looking for jobs yet. We're talking about preparing in that job search and getting realistic expectations. What can we expect in terms of employment? So the first question that you need to ask yourself is, number one, what is it that you do? But more importantly, perhaps, what is it that you can do? And here's why. Because in Israel, unlike generally North America, Israel is not as much about the title that you have as much as it is what are your skills? What's your skill base? What things are you able to do? And what have you done in the past? Because your broad range of skills carves for you somewhat of a niche in terms of things that make you special and make you stand out from other people looking for employment as well. And that makes you very likable to employers, that employers will be able to see the specialness that you have to offer to their place of employment. You want to be able to research the job market in Israel. You want to be able to develop contacts and networks. In Israel, literally everybody is related. And it's not about protectsi as much as it's about people know people who know people. And when you're looking for a job, you can contact people that you know in Israel and say, listen, I'm planning on moving to Israel 2 to 5 years down the road. Keep your eyes open for me. Let me know if you know of places that are looking for people. But here's what's also great. You want to be able to develop your contacts. Now is the time to be able to reach out. You can reach out through LinkedIn. You can reach out through contacts you already have to develop contacts and develop your network within what you do, within your field of work. So that way, when you do come to Israel and when you start getting closer to your Aliyah date, you can reconnect with those individuals and say, hey, remember me? We connected way back when. I'm coming to Israel. Do you know of any opportunities there are available? You want to be able to take advantage of our online employment workshops. You see, people say, okay, now that I'm talking about employment, what can I do? Where can I get my resources? Nefesh B'Nefesh has an entire employment department that's there to assist you with all of these, to help you with developing your network, to help you with contacts, to help you with those realistic expectations with regards to your job, and to give you an idea based on what it is that you do, what types of things are available. Our employment department is connected with over 3,500 companies throughout Israel, and they really have their finger on the pulse of employment in Israel. I encourage you, check out our employment web workshops. You can find them on our YouTube channel. Also, you can contact employment@nbn.org.il directly and speak to one of our employment advisors and even set up an online consultation. Also, for licensing, anyone who's in the medical field and wants to find out information about having their licenses recognized in Israel so they can practice in Israel, we have an entire licensing department at Nefesh B'Nefesh. We also have a program called MedX that we host once a year where doctors, people in the medical profession are able to start that process of having their licensure recognized in Israel prior to Aliyah, so that way they can speed that employment process once they've arrived in Israel. All of these things are available to you. Our employment department also has a job board that we host. Now, again, like I said, it's a little too early to start actually looking for jobs, but you can at least get a sense of what the job market is like. So all of these things are available to you, and I encourage you to take advantage of them. And again, to reach out to Nefesh B'Nefesh with any questions. What about education? Now, so for those who have children who are going to be of school age when you make Aliyah, this is a critical topic of research. And we have webinars that discuss this specifically, so I'm not going to go into it in detail. Number one, about understanding the education system in Israel and how it works, because there is what we would call, I guess you would call it North America, a public school education, because every child is entitled to education in Israel. But because it's a Jewish state, so there are secular schools, what we call mamlachti or municipal schools. There are also religious schools. And those things, there are different levels, I guess you can say, different types of schools. And these are things that we can help you with. We have articles on our website about it, and we have webinars to be able to understand how the education system works in Israel, as well as finding the right school for your children. Now, I'm going to just touch on something. If you have children with any types of special needs with regards to education, it is crucial, it's critical that you start that process to get an idea of finding the community that will be able to provide those services in the school system that you may need. And again, we'll be able to help you with that as well. Information about how to register for schools when the time comes. and also what types of benefits your children will be eligible for when you make Aliyah. So again, how do we do this? So as I mentioned before, we have webinars on this topic. We have education specialists at Nefesh, and also communities like the ones that I mentioned before that have municipal liaisons, people working for the municipality to assist those people making Aliyah out of those communities. Municipal liaisons are fantastic in terms of assistance with schools, with registering for schools and finding the right schools for your children. Now, if you are going to be in university, so just to know, one of your Aliyah benefits is that Israel may subsidize that university degree, and that's something we'll talk about soon when we talk about Aliyah benefits. What about IDF service? Again, this is a huge topic of which we have lots of information on our website, and we have lots of webinars available on our YouTube channel, and I encourage you to research. It's important for you if you are of age for the Army, or if you will be of age for the Army when you make Aliyah. Additionally, if you have children who are, when they become teenagers, when they become 17, 18 years old, or if they're older, they will be eligible and they will have a draft requirement. It's important to understand that there is a draft requirement in Israel for those people who are in Israel at that age. And it's important to research this. It's important to appreciate it, to understand it, and to research things like Army options and Army programs. There are instances where people can get an exemption from the Army. For example, religious women who do not want to serve because of religious reasons, they're able to get an exemption from the Army. And in such instances, they may want to do something called Shirut Leumi, which is national service. And again, we have information on our website about this as well. Finally, it's important to understand the service requirements themselves. At what age is a person obligated to serve? This changes if someone is a doctor or a dentist, a physician or a dentist, that the Army service is extended because the Army needs doctors. Again, it's important to research this. And if you're projecting Aliyah 2 to 5 years down the road or more, this is something that you can plan for and be able to research at this time. If you have questions in this regard, like I said, we have plenty of articles on our website, but you can also email our Army department directly at army@nbn.org.il. What about healthcare? Now, the healthcare system in Israel is what lots of people say is a socialized system. In a lot of ways, it parallels the health system in some provinces in Canada, but in many ways, it's similar to the health system in the United States as well. I'll give you the quick overview. It's a government-run system, and therefore everyone needs to be enrolled in the system, and everybody pays for it. But the way you collect on it is that there are these 4 companies. In Hebrew, they're called Kupot Cholim. And each company is basically, as they have in the U.S., an HMO. Each company has their own network of doctors and clinics. And when you make Aliyah, you'll be selecting one of those 4 companies to be your health network through which you're going to get the health care that you're paying the government for. Now, we have plenty of webinars that I encourage you to take advantage of. Again, they are on our YouTube channel to research and understand the healthcare system in Israel. But the point at which the reason I want to bring it up at this point, 2 to 5 years down the road, is for 2 reasons. Number one, because if there are any health services that you or anyone in your family are currently receiving, any ongoing health services, medications, treatments, anything of that nature, it is vital to research to make sure that those services will be available for you when you make Aliyah and that they're covered by the healthcare system. Now, again, things can change in 2 to 5 years down the road, of course, but you want to be able to get at least a general understanding to be able to know as far as research, so you'll be adequately prepared. I like to tell my Olim that Aliyah planning is really just eliminating as many surprises as possible. And since we're sitting now 2 to 5 years at least down the road, it's a good time to be able to start some of that research. Again, if there is an issue, that'll be able to be addressed in time. understand when we talk about healthcare that, again, it's a different culture in Israel. It's a different cadence at which things operate. And understand that that's neither good nor bad. It's just different. It's okay. And there will be some cultural adaptation. It will be some getting used to the process. And sometimes you're going to need to advocate for yourself. That's okay. Sometimes people will be there to help, but understand that at the get-go. It's okay. It's just different. So let's move on to finances. Question, how are we going to be supporting ourselves when we make Aliyah? How are you going to be supporting? Now, maybe you're already retired or you plan on being retired and you'll have a fixed income already coming in. Perhaps you're going to be working from within Israel, as we discussed employment. Maybe you'll be working remotely from abroad. All of these things are important, and all these things are important to take into account in determining what we call your Aliyah viability, your finances. Number one, you want to budget. You want to get a good idea, a good sense of the cost of living in Israel. And you want to get a sense of what your budget will look like based on where you plan on living, based on what you anticipate to have coming in terms of income. You want to be able, as we mentioned before, to be able to project what type of employment opportunities you'll be able to have and what that will produce for you. What type of tax situation will you have to address? Now, this is mostly the case if you'll be working remotely. Many people work remotely these days, thank God, in today's global economy. It's something, though, not to be worried about, but it's something that we will advise you to research from a tax perspective if it actually is the case. What type of lifestyle changes will you be able or will you have to anticipate by moving to Israel? Now, this is another thing, like you said, it's neither good or bad, it's just different. For example, houses in Israel generally are smaller than you find in North America. Apartments in Israel are generally smaller than you find in North America. While in North America, generally you'll find apartments and houses where rooms have closets in them. In Israel, most often, the construction is done without walk-in closets, and usually you have closets in the room. Maybe the rooms are going to be a little smaller. This is something you'll have to appreciate. Now, again, we're talking 2 to 5 years down the road, but it's important to appreciate that there are going to be differences. Take that in stride. Understand that at the get-go, it's neither good nor bad. It's just different, that there are going to be somewhat of those lifestyle changes. Understand when we talk about finances that there's also benefits that you receive from the state of Israel, which we're going to talk about. And that can also be factored in terms of how you'll be supporting yourself initially. So for example, let's just say, for argument's sake, you're coming to Israel and you're planning on finding a job in Israel, but let's say you find out it'll take you 3 months, 4 months, maybe 5 months to find your first job when you arrive in Israel. That's okay. Why? The government of Israel will start with a stipend, what we call sal klita, which is money from the government to help out during those first 6 months when you first arrive in Israel. Again, these are benefits. These are things that can be taken into account in terms of determining your finances and how you'll support yourself when you make Aliyah. Also, you can figure out with all this information, your Aliyah viability. Figure out your earning power, include all of your assets if you're planning on selling your home, if you're going to be coming with any type of resources, savings, etc. Figure out how much you hope to be and you anticipate to be earning when you make Aliyah, and then take a look at what your expenses, projected expenses are going to be. What you'll wind up with is what we call your Aliyah viability. Now, how do we do this? How do we do all this kind of research? What's available for you? Well, number one, like I said, we have lots of information on our website in terms of researching this. Included in that, we have sample budgets that are available based on the size of the family. Not only do we have sample budgets, but we have something, it's a spreadsheet where you're able to put in information of your lifestyle, and it will predict for you, it'll explain to you what your budget can be or what should be, what to expect, and that way you can plan forward of what you're going to need. I encourage you, all of this is on our website, and I encourage you to take advantage of it. And as I mentioned before, if you have questions or need guidance, contact Nefesh B'Nefesh directly, and one of our professionals, our Aliyah advisors, will be able to guide you in this regard. I want to again underscore this. Utilize our website, nbn.org.il. Use our YouTube channel where we have a whole host of webinars and videos about communities and employment, etc. Use the Facebook groups that are online. Some of these are Nefesh B'Nefesh Facebook groups. Some of them are not moderated by Nefesh B'Nefesh, but they're spectacular ones. For example, there's a Facebook group called Living Financially Smarter in Israel, which is moderated by Rivka Lepowitz, who is a financial planner in Israel. And you can ask questions there as far as budgeting, as far as finances, as far as expectations, and get credible information. For healthcare research, there's a Facebook group called Navigating the Israeli Healthcare System. There is for healthcare professionals and mental healthcare professionals, there's something called Get Help Israel. Network with people, reach out to people that you know. Don't be ashamed and don't be afraid to ask for help. You'll find it there readily available. And lastly, as we're going to discuss, learn about your Aliyah rights and your benefits, what's available to you, and we're going to circle back to that right now. So until now, we've been touching on the planning aspect of Aliyah. Let's now move over to the procedural side, the nitty-gritty. Now, again, a lot of this is not going to be relevant, projecting 2 to 5 years down the road, but there are some things that you still can do already if you want to get started in this regard. What is the process of Aliyah? What's the procedural side of Aliyah? Well, number one, once you're within 12 months of Aliyah, you want to fill out an online application for Aliyah on our Nefesh B'Nefesh website. If there's a chance that you'll be making Aliyah within 12 months, fill out the application. People say to me, well, I don't know when I'm going to be making Aliyah. Maybe it'll be this summer, maybe it'll be next summer. So I say, it'll be within 12 months, or it could be within 12 months. Fill out that application. It's okay. I'd rather you be in a situation that you are all ready to make Aliyah, and then for whatever reason, if you have to push off your plans, then the opposite to be true. For you to come and say, I have a job that's ready for me, they want me there in a month, and then you find out that you have a few months worth of bureaucracy before you can make Aliyah. So if there's a chance of making Aliyah within the next 12 months, start that application. Let's submit that application. Let's move on. What else? Once you've submitted the application, you're going to have to collect documentation, and you're going to be uploading scans of those documents to your online file at Nefesh B'Nefesh. After that, you're going to hear from a government agency called the Jewish Agency. This is the government agency, the Israeli government agency that oversees Aliyah from abroad. And they're going to reach out to you, and they're going to schedule an interview with you. And once you've had the interview and you've collected and shown them all of the documentation, it usually takes at least a few weeks before you receive what's called your Aliyah approval. And that's going to be an email saying, Mazal Tov, you've been approved for Aliyah. And when relevant, that email is also going to have information of how to get what's called your Aliyah visa. The Aliyah visa is a sticker that's placed into your passports. That usually takes also another few weeks to get. And once you have your Aliyah visa in hand, you're ready to book your Aliyah flight. The next flight you take to Israel, you bring with you all of your documentation. When you arrive in Israel, they stop it when you come off the plane, direct you to processing. About an hour later, you'll be walking out of the airport as Israeli citizens with Israeli healthcare. Now, let's talk about what type of documentation. People say, what are these documents that you need? What type of things are you going to need? So it varies based on situation. But in general, these are the types of things that you'd be looking at. Number one, you need to have a valid passport. And what a valid passport means is that it can't be expiring within the next 12 months. Now, again, we're projecting 2 to 5 years down the road. But if you're looking at your passport and you're seeing that your passport expires in 5 years, keep in mind, one of the things you may have to do before making Aliyah is renew that passport. The next thing that a person has to present is something called proof of Judaism. Proof of Judaism can be something in the way of a letter from a synagogue rabbi indicating one's Jewish lineage. If one has converted, it might be the conversion certificate and additionally other letters indicating what was studied. And I get a lot of calls, I get a lot of questions from my Olim saying, wait a second, why do I have to show proof that I'm Jewish? That it's very insulting that I should have to do such a thing. And I like to underscore the following. Everything you see here in terms of Aliyah documentation has nothing to do with religiosity. It's all bureaucracy. Everything is bureaucracy in this regard. And when it comes to this proof of Judaism, the reason why it's required is because of something called the law of return. Anyone who wants to make Aliyah has to fall under the law of return, which means that they're Jewish either through lineage or through conversion or through marriage. And as such, the Jewish agency is going to require documentation indicating it as such. It may be a letter from a synagogue rabbi indicating your Jewish lineage. It may be your conversion certificate if you are a convert to Judaism. Plus, it might also be other documents or other letters indicating what was involved in the conversion. As you get closer to your Aliyah date, we'll be able to advise you in terms of what you can expect in that regard. You'll also need civil documentation. And this is because we have to remember we're applying for citizenship in a foreign country. So there are civil documents and authentications that are going to be required by the state of Israel. Everyone is going to need a birth certificate, an original birth certificate, and what we call a long form birth certificate, which means that it has your parents' names listed as well. Please note that if the birth certificate and any other documentations, if they're written in a foreign language, if you were born in a foreign country, and it's written in a language other than English, Hebrew, or French, it may require a notarized translation as well. But you'll need, again, a birth certificate with your parents' names listed as well. A marriage certificate. If you've been married more than once, then all marriage certificates will be required as well. Divorce certificates or death certificates of former spouses. Again, if a person was married more than once, multiple times, then all of the appropriate documents will be required. Additionally, one is required to get a criminal background check from every country an individual lived in from age 14 and on for a year or more, from age 14 or on. So if a person's been living in the United States, it's an FBI background check. If someone is living in Canada, it's an RCMP background check. And all of these documents that we listed need also what's called an apostille. An apostille is an international authentication. What it does is it authenticates the signature on the document so that in Israel, they know that the document is real and it is not forged. Depending on the document, there may be different processes in order to obtain the apostille. And again, we'll be able to advise you in this regard when the time comes. There will be something called proof of living outside of Israel, which is something that indicates that your main residence has been outside of Israel for at least 7 years prior to your Aliyah. That amount of time varies based on what we call your Aliyah status, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And there will be also, or there may be, additional forms or documents that are required as needed by the Jewish agency that, depending upon previous marriages, it could depend upon where a person is from, what country, if a person was born in a foreign country, and other details as well may affect that. Let's talk a little bit about what we call Aliyah statuses. Now, these are things that, well, I'm not going to go into it in depth, but these are things that can affect the time it takes for you to make Aliyah and can affect the documentation that is required. There is what we call an Oleh Chadash, which is someone who has no prior Israeli citizenship, and most Olim from North America fall into this category. When I say no prior Israeli citizenship, it means that not only have you not had any type of Israeli citizenship, but it means that your parents, neither of your parents were Israeli when you were born. Because, whether you know it or not, Israeli citizenship is passed to first generation. So there is what's called an Oleh Chadash. There is what's called an Ezrach Oleh. An Ezrach Oleh is someone who was born outside of Israel, whose parents, either one or both parents, were Israeli when the individual was born. As I mentioned before, Israeli citizenship passes to first generation, and in such a case, that individual, while is still eligible for Aliyah, that person needs to already have an Israeli passport. And there's a process in which, if you don't have that yet, there's a process that you'll need to follow with the Israeli consulate in your area in order to have yourself registered and get your Israeli passport. There is something called a Katin Choser, which is someone who either made Aliyah with his family at a young age or was born in Israel and left Israel before age 14 with his or her parents. Now, such a person already has Israeli citizenship, would already have an Israeli passport, but is still eligible for the Aliyah benefits that one receives. But as such, the documentation that's required may be a little bit different. Now, there are also former temporary residents. There is such a thing in Israel as temporary residency, which somebody can come to Israel and not get citizenship, but they're able to live for 2 to 5 years in Israel at what we call a temporary resident. Now, such a person does receive an Israeli identification number, and therefore they're listed in the Israeli computer system. And as such, it affects their Aliyah processing as well as the documentation that is required. We have a wonderful article about this on our website as well. And again, our Aliyah advisors will be able to advise you when the time comes as far as any differences in documentation requirements as well as benefits and process that will happen if you are in fact a former temporary resident. I want to encourage you that all of these Aliyah statuses that we're mentioning here now are all eligible for Aliyah. What that means is that even if you already have Israeli citizenship, you are still eligible for your Aliyah benefits, which we'll talk about. There is also something called a mishpachat olim, which means that even if there's one spouse who is already Israeli and not normally eligible for Aliyah benefits, but since that Israeli is married to someone who is eligible for Aliyah, and they have children who were born outside of Israel, then the entire family is looked at as a whole, as a family making Aliyah, and even the Israeli would not get Aliyah benefits. Even that Israeli is included in the Aliyah benefits for the family. Now, lastly, there is what's called a Toshav Chozer, which is a returning Israeli resident. This is someone who is Israeli who left Israel after age 14, and as such, that individual is not eligible for Aliyah benefits on his or her own. We at Nefesh B'Nefesh don't assist in that process, but we can guide you in terms of with whom you should speak in order to be able to get whatever benefits may be available to you, as well as planning that you should keep in mind in such a case. Now, I've been referring to these Aliyah benefits the whole time. Let's talk about them really briefly. What types of things are you eligible for when you make Aliyah? Number one, a free Aliyah flight if needed. That includes 2 pieces of luggage. Normally El Al flights allow you 1 piece of luggage. The Aliyah flight that you receive, you get 2 pieces of luggage. You get transportation from the airport when you arrive to your first destination. Basic Israeli healthcare, for the most part, is going to be free for the first 6 months. I say for the most part because it may be affected by your Aliyah status that we mentioned before. Ulpan is a benefit that's available to you as well. Ulpan is an immersive Hebrew language study program. This is something that is available to you from the state of Israel. You can always take Ulpan, but if you take it within the first 18 months after making Aliyah, they'll pay for it. There are certain programs, private programs, that are not paid for, that are private, but otherwise, again, we'll be able to advise you. Otherwise, it is paid for. It's a 5-month intensive program, 5 months, 5 days a week, 5 hours a day of learning Hebrew. What they do is they assess at the first day, they assess your Hebrew language level. They put you into a class of everybody at the same level. And the goal is that during those 5 months, they'll get you to whatever the next level is. As such, I'm going to digress for a second. I would encourage you during these 2 to 5 years until you start moving closer to your Aliyah, start working on your Hebrew. Hebrew is an important aspect, obviously, of functioning in the country. It affects every aspect of living in Israel, including employment, including school, including community, as we mentioned before. Now is the time you can actually start working, taking those steps and getting your Hebrew better. There are plenty of resources online, and you can find them on our website. There is a program as well called Hebrew Connect, which is an Ulpan program you can take prior to making Aliyah. All of these things I encourage you to research. The Ulpan benefit that we're talking about here, if we get back to here, the Ulpan benefit that we're talking about is after you make Aliyah, and that's something that's subsidized, as we mentioned, by the state of Israel. There are also tax breaks that you receive when you make Aliyah. If you're working from within Israel, there are tax credits you receive for the first 3.5 years. There is something called Arnona, which is a municipal tax that is paid. It's like a property tax, but it's paid whether you own or whether you rent. It's usually the person who is living there that pays the Arnona. So communities have a discount on Arnona for people who have made Aliyah. that can be redeemed within the first or second year after making Aliyah for 12 months. And there's also a benefit, a tax benefit on income from abroad. If there's income that is coming in, investments or retirement, pensions, or even if there's income coming in that you're not working for in Israel, for the first 10 years, Israel says, don't tell us about it. We'll pretend like we don't know. For the first 10 years, Israel is not going to bother you from a tax perspective on any of that foreign income. Now, we encourage people to research from a tax perspective with tax professionals. We'll be able to direct you to some of those, as well as resources we have on our website to help with that tax planning. There are also customs benefits. If you were bringing in personal items within the first 3 years after you make Aliyah, you're eligible to bring in up to 3 shipments of personal items, and Israel will waive the import taxes. There are exceptions to this, and again, we have articles that outline this. There are tax benefits if you purchase or if you import a new car to Israel. Again, we have articles that explain that tax benefit as well. There are lower mortgage rates available as well. There is what I referenced earlier, Sal Klita, which is money from the government that they will give you for the first 6 or 7 months after you make Aliyah. The amount that you receive is based on the size of the family and the age of children that are making Aliyah. You can find those calculators and those resources on our website under Sal Klita. There's rent subsidy that kicks in the 8th month after you've made Aliyah. And there are higher education subsidies. If you're planning on getting a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in Israel, there are subsidies available for Olim from the state of Israel, although there are age limits that may apply in those regards. So basically we've covered, again, long-term planning, things to focus on. We talked about procedural side. We talked about the planning aspect of Aliyah. And I encourage you, whatever status you are, whatever stage you're at in your Aliyah planning, I encourage you, reach out to Nefesh B'Nefesh. Reach out for our assistance. We're here to help, and we're here to provide you with what you need. And whatever the time is, whether it's going to be 2 years from now, whether it'll be 5 years from now, whether it'll be longer than 5 years from now, or whether it's going to be even sooner than that, whatever the time is, I believe that's the right time, and I look forward to welcoming you home to Israel, God willing, soon. Thank you for the opportunity of me being able to present to you, and I wish you b'hatzlacha and all the best.